So everybody's been cooped up, and since 'tis the season of training videos. With that being said, I'm Jared Busby, but in the society, Edward Gray. You can call me Sir. You can call me His Excellency. You can call me His Grace. I don't care. It's late for dinner. I don't prefer. One of the things I want to talk about in terms before we get to Pell work, with Pell work and this video series, I've got a few different audiences in mind. The first audience, of course, is the person who's new to this, who is just getting started and trying to figure out why things aren't working. The next piece of this goes into that intermediate practitioner, somebody who's gunning for the belt, and then hopefully this provides some of our trainers, some of our more advanced instructors, food for thought in terms of how to communicate some of these basics, some of the skill set to the rest of the populace that's trying to learn. My first comment on communication is both about what is said and what is heard. Just every knight you meet knows how to throw a shot with power, but every knight you meet is going to talk about it just a little bit differently. And for the most part, they're saying the same things. But which method you hear as somebody trying to learn, that's going to be based upon your experiences where you come from. So whatever I say, find somebody else to say it a little differently and see what works best for you. That's the first point in communication, which leads into training and study. So why do Pell work at all? Well, the point, right, is to train, is to get better at a thing. The stages of learning and progression in training, as I view them, are simply, first, knowing that a thing can be done. There's this thing called a flat snap. People throw it. Who knew? Second is being able to see it in real time. Somebody is throwing a flat snap. Hey, somebody's throwing a flat snap at me. The next piece of learning is having understood the concept of a flat snap is trying to throw a flat snap, trying to throw it in the time available on the field. The last step is that of practitioner, of mastery, of being able to throw that flat snap in the time allotted on the field in the opening that is allowed for. So there's this progression. And understand, as someone who is learning to fight, you'll be better at different things at different times. You may be a practitioner of a flat snap, yet only understanding that a Molinet exists, right? And so you'll have to go back through this entire process again as you learn different pieces of the fighting, right? So when I talk about fighting and I talk about shot selection, different shots that can be thrown, I think of this as a tool chest, different tools that can be brought to bear in a different fight as they're called for. So you will, as a fighter, you'll want to broaden your tool set, the options you have, so when you face a particular opponent, you have the right tool for that opening in that time. So with that being said, I want to talk about the first piece of Pell work, which for me and for many of us is this discussion of power generation. There's no point in throwing a flat snap if the flat snap is going to land light. If the shot isn't going to be counted by your opponent, there's no point in throwing it. And so what you first must do is learn how to throw that shot successfully against a Pell, against your practice buddy. But before you bring it to bear on the field, you actually have to get the power to it. So we're going to start there, and then we're going to discuss how to broaden that shot out and get all the mileage you can out of a flat snap. But first, power. What am I talking about? We talk about a good shot in the SCA, a shot that would be a telling blow that would strike and injure a person through armor. So anytime, just to introduce you, these are swords. This happens to be a single-handed broadsword that I tend to use quite a lot. For reference purposes only, I put a little yellow band here, and the point of this little yellow band is that's the center mass of the weapon, right? So every last one of them has got this mark in that manner. When the shot is thrown, it will have a couple different properties. Before it's thrown, it has its mass, its weight. How heavy is it? Okay. When we look at the Pell, it will have a velocity, a speed. I can throw this fast. I can throw it slow. Okay. When this is in motion, it has characteristics, momentum, velocity. And so momentum is simply mass and velocity, the product. When we talk about force and acceleration, kinetic energy, so kinetic energy is simply half the mass times the velocity squared. So what you'll understand here is the faster this goes, your acceleration, your kinetic energy goes up very quickly. Parabola, right? Goes up the square. And for a person to take a shot as good, it has to have enough energy or enough momentum delivered into the target. So first, you have to get the sword moving. That is step number one. The question of how hard, how fast, how much power, how much energy, how much momentum is a learned trait, is something that you develop with practice, talking to your peers, talking to your knights, talking to your trainers in terms of, was that shot good? Would you accept that shot? For me, I anticipate that being sufficient. By no means is that as hard as I can throw, but sufficient is what you need to be able to throw no matter the circumstances for your opponent to take it. Now, there are different ways to get to a good shot. Let's look at these different swords here for one moment. This is the sword I'm currently using. This is the sword that I had used in previous years. Notice some differences. This one's shorter, this one's longer. This one is, by virtue of its length and its width, heavier. So when this guy gets moving, there's a whole lot of energy in it. But this one's a little lighter. I can speed it up with less effort. So there's a trade-off there. How much effort does it take? How much power can you put into the shot? This one is similar in build, yet shorter, but similar diameter rattan. But you see, because it is shorter, that its center of mass has moved down. So this is more tip-heavy than this sword. This is going to behave more closely to my hand, right? You can see how close that is to my hand versus how close that stripe is to my hand here. That will give a different response when you are trying to recover this sword. It takes more energy to bring it back to me for the second shot. And then you can see these swords are of similar weight. This one's a touch heavier, although shorter, because you can see it is wider. But both of these are significantly lighter than either of those three. So when I come back to this Pell, critical in developing the power is developing tip speed, getting the sword moving. Now this sword, being somewhat thicker, is not, it has, we talk about momentum and follow through. A point of technical note, how whippy, how flexible a stick is dependent upon section, how wide is it? But more importantly, how deep is it? Stiffness for a box, 1/12 the height, the width times the height cubed. So that thickness is exponentially more important than the width, the cube. So making a deep fish bat will be far more unforgiving to your opponent, will deliver much more of that force than a minimum diameter stick. A thing that Duke Sean of Tarragon talks about, Duke Sean uses a 2-pound sword. He's got a plastic basket, basically minimum diameter stick, roughly 38 inches, I think. I can't remember off the top of my head, something like that. So it's a light stick compared to this guy that's 3.5. This guy beats 3. But his point is, if I rotate it 180 degrees, I got enough tip speed on there. Well, what do you mean by tip speed? Speed, I can talk about pushing this forward in a linear direction, or I can talk about rotating the stick, right? So velocity at this tip is the distance from the point of rotation and how big an arc has it transversed. So this tip is moving twice as fast as the mid point on the blade. So if you hit somebody out here, a lot more velocity than if you hit somebody here. I'll talk about that more later. So again, before I'm developing power, I'm talking about the concepts of what is power, what is energy, what is momentum. These are the things that register to people. That high tone crack, it's a high acceleration, a high kinetic energy response. The slow thud that moves this is a lot of momentum. I believe that every individual has a slightly different threshold for kinetic energy kill versus momentum kill. You'll figure that out with practice. Now, Pells, sticks, tools for training. All a Pell is a training tool, a tool to develop my ability to deliver shots, a reference point for me to imagine an opponent. And when I am developing my shots against a Pell, I have options. I can use my good sword. Now, understand that I blow up a good sword every few months if I'm fighting somebody, and there's a fair amount of effort into making the sword the way I want it. So I don't want to necessarily use my good sword all the time. And if I'm locked up inside, fortunately I'm not at the moment, I'm going to hit the ceiling with my good sword. So there are options. If you're locked in an apartment somewhere, this is a length of steel pipe. That is what it is. But notice, depending on the length of the steel pipe, you can make it a surrogate for any of these swords. You can match the weight, and you can reasonably match the center of mass. So that handle, that center of mass is lined up just on top of each other. So if I'm holding it here, it behaves just as my sword would, without taking the ceiling out. That's there. And that's the height of the ceiling that I hit, depending on which one I'm using. Alternatively, if you happen to have hammers, you're trying to train, this one is a 32 ounce, this one's a 42 ounce. Again, centers of mass reasonably replicate these swords depending on where you hold them. If I I'm working on developing my strength. This is a 5.5-pound training hammer. You're doing this slow. You're doing this to develop power and strength in your shoulders as opposed to speed. But again, a surrogate and training tool. If I'm simply working on body mechanics and positioning relative to a Pell or opposition, a dead sword that once was, so everything above this has been broomed, it's been cut off, provides you something that you can take inside the house and you can practice light taps against a pillar in the house, what have you, without immediate damage. These are simple training tools for single-handed swords. You might notice these are longer. I enjoy working with long swords as well. My typical long sword right now is this one. There's different hardware in use depending upon which of these swords. I had to make hardware in a hurry. I did this one. This is lighter because there's no metal fittings. And so you'll notice that the center of gravity is moved up because it's not counterbalanced at the pommel. That is personal preference. This guy is a beast. And will land like a ton of bricks. Surrogates. Depending on where you put your handle, very quickly you have a match for these swords. This happens to be a 4-pound sledge with very similar characteristics as these long swords here. It's actually a little heavier than these guys. This is a training sword because this is a 6-pound sledge, 6 or 8. If you want to work on the shoulders, this is a 16-pound maul. It provides that opportunity. And again, not quite accurate at this length, so a little longer. You have a replica here with a piece of steel pipe. Key here is just making sure that you pick a length that doesn't take the ceiling out. These are wasters. The word waster means to waste away, which means you take a wooden sword as opposed to a steel sword, and you strike your target repetitively. It eventually breaks down and wastes away and is destroyed. This one's wood. This one's plastic, available on Amazon. A wooden dowel from your local Home Depot. Obviously, the weight on the wooden dowel is not a representative. It simply gives you the length to work through geometry in terms of where the stick is relative to your person and the threat target. So these are simply some tools to use with Pell work. And again, questions people have asked recently when they're cooped up in an apartment for an indefinite period of time. How do you do a Pell exercise or drill in a small space? And so I looked at things like hammers, short lengths of pipe, dead swords, and even sledges for longsword work with a shortened handle to match the characteristics of your longsword. So that is simply, you find the right weight on the head, something approximate, and then you find the balance point and you map it out and make a handle of appropriate length. All right, I'm going to wrap this bit up, and then I'm going to go into power generation momentarily. Thank you.